all of you here. And this promises to be a most interesting discussion. The timing certainly is auspicious given the news today about further encroachments on democracy and revelations about indeed more attempts at getting the Justice Department to discredit the election. So our discussion this evening is right on point. I'd like to again welcome everybody. My name is Sivia Tamarkin. I'm president of the Arizona section of the National Council of Jewish Women. And we have a very large crowd tonight, which is wonderful. I would like to take a moment to explain to those who may not be as familiar with NCJW who we are, what we do. We are a national social justice organization. This is the Arizona section. We are one of nearly 60 sections across the country. And we are social justice advocates. Our mission, of course, is to protect human rights, freedoms, dignity, and improve the quality of life for women, children, and families. In order to do that, we now play, as of the last few years, a very active role in policy, in having an impact and an influence on what goes on from the State House to the White House. I was on a session today with all the other section presidents and the national leadership, and they used the phrase, which I think is very appropriate. We're all about empowerment advocacy, making our voices heard and being a voice for those who feel they are voiceless. And so it was in that context that we were very involved in the legislative session in Arizona this year, a session that still is not over, a session that is in limbo, in hiatus, because they cannot even pass a budget, a session in which the governor vetoed 22 bills out of his dismay, I guess, his anger over his flat tax not being approved. So a number of good bills were vetoed. But this is a session in which we saw an onslaught of restrictive, of limiting, of anti-justice, if you will, anti-democratic legislation proposed. And it's very interesting because clearly in the wake of President Biden's election and the January 6th insurrection, there was an aggressive push by Republican legislatures all across the country to roll back rights. Hundreds of voter suppression bills, abortion bans, anti-LGBTQ plus bills were passed. And Arizona, unfortunately, was in the lead in this backward movement. We had some bills that were just beyond belief, and the machinations that brought them to the forefront left so many people incredulous. How did a bill that was proposed to redesign license plates turn into an abortion ban? What kind of maneuvering happened behind the scenes? Why, at a time of a global pandemic, with high business closures, high rates of unemployment, high rates of eviction, with strained healthcare systems and schools struggling with all the attendant demands and burdens of closures and distance learning, why did this legislature in Arizona not pass bills to benefit its citizenry? Why was a bill that would give dental assistance to pregnant women not passed? Why was a bill that would give support for spina bifida not passed? Why was one of the very first bills proposed in January, in the wake of all of this, a bill that would give first-degree felony charges punishable by death or imprisonment for pregnant women and their doctors who were seeking abortions. What special interests dominate our legislature, and why is there no accountability for constituents? So tonight, we want to pull away the curtain and look behind the scenes to understand why this is happening. We don't want this to be a gripe session, but we want to examine the lessons and the opportunities that enable us to learn from what happened and what continues to happen. We certainly are at an inflection point. How do we change systems and processes? How do we reshape policy to create systems that are designed to benefit people? How do we repair the brokenness? And what can we do to bring change? And NCJW is sponsoring this type of discussion because we are a platform for change. So tonight, to help us understand some of what is happening, we have some amazing panelists. First, we have Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, who certainly needs no introduction. She has been a speaker and an attendee at NCJW events frequently. And she now needs no introduction at all, since she's a headliner on CNN and MSNBC, and even yesterday was an op-ed contributor to the Washington Post. She serves as the Chief Elections Officer of the state, as well as the de facto Lieutenant Governor, the first in line to succeed the governor in case of death, resignation, or removal. But it is her duty as Secretary of State to register voters, secure and certify elections, which is why she has come under attack and is in the crosshairs of those extremists who subscribe to Donald Trump's big lie about the big election steal. It has necessitated her to have security protection in the wake of death threats and armed protesters showing up at her home. And the attacks against her, not just by violent extremists and QAnon agitators, but by extremists in our own legislation, in this state that represents so much of what is happening around the country. The threats against her, the removal of her duly elected powers by this state legislature, represents what so many, including President Biden, have expressed as the very real threat to our democracy. We have with us two incredible legislators. Raquel Terán represents Legislative District 30 in the Arizona House. She is a state lawmaker in her second term. And this session, she served on the Government and Elections Committee and the Criminal Justice Reform Committee. She was also elected in January as chair of the Arizona Democratic Party. Prior to being elected as state legislature, she was a community organizer who organized a movement to oppose Senate Bill 1070, the state law that targeted people and prompted then Sheriff Arpaio to engage in his roundups. And she worked on successful efforts to recall the bill's sponsor, former Senator Russell Pierce, who also, I might add, was involved in the higher ranks of neo-Nazi group. We have with us also an honorary member of NCJW, legislator Athena Salman, member of the Arizona House of Representatives, now in her third term, representing District 26. And she is a past co-minority whip, and she also worked in community organizing and public policy before taking office. We have Jody Liggett, not only a member, but our own policy advisor. She is the founder of the Arizona Center for Women's Advancement, ACWA, the first think tank by and for Arizona women. Jody has served as senior policy advisor to former mayor, now Congressman Greg Stanton, deputy chief of staff to Mayor Kate Gallego. She was the vice president of external affairs and executive director of Planned Parenthood Arizona and the CEO of Arizona Foundation for Women. She was also a policy advisor for human services for Governor Jane Hull and has been on the staff committee for the Arizona House of Representatives as she started her career. So we are delighted to have all of you with us for this discussion this evening. As I said, NCJW has been very involved in this session. Thanks to Jody as our policy advisor and Carol Consalvo, our senior VP of policy and legislation. We have monitored so many bills, testified for so many bills. We have been part of a very effective Arizona Reproductive Rights and Justice Coalition, strategizing how to prevent some of these bills from being passed. And indeed, I will say that the coalition was successful. 12 out of 12 bills we thought were dead. And then the 12th was resurrected, as I said a moment ago, as a striker on a bill that was first intended to be a redesign of license plates. So it underscores the obstructionism, the chicanery, the maneuvering and manipulation that seems to represent special interest agendas. Because it is all about the election. It is about voter suppression. Arizona has led the way with Fraudit and with our state Senate president bringing in the cyber ninjas and again, stripping Secretary Hobbs of her authority, her duly elected authority. I would like to start by asking Secretary Hobbs, how did we come to this juncture?
Well, I want to say it started before the election when, the president at the then president started to spread misinformation, knowing that his reelection was probably in jeopardy. That there was fraud, and he undermined vote by mail, which, as you all probably know, Arizona has enjoyed for decades here. It's a very successful and secure way to vote for Arizonans, and during the pandemic, the safest way. So we knew heading into the election that there was going to be a lot of misinformation that we were going to have to combat. We were also gearing up to prepare for post-election legal challenges that we also knew would be there. I don't think we saw 9 election challenges in Arizona. There was no evidence in any of them, so they were all thrown out. And we were well prepared. But I don't think we saw it continuing after all of the legal pieces played out. We certified the election. This electoral college happened, and then January 6th happened, which is normally a ministerial function of an administrative function of the Congress, and that certainly isn't how things played out. And now Trump and his followers are continuing to try to undermine voters' confidence in our election, lay the groundwork to steal the next one. And that's what this whole Fraudit is about. There was no fraud in the 2020 election, but I have zero confidence that the report that comes out of this so-called audit will indicate that. They have set up an atmosphere that's prime for cooking the books, which is, what we think they intended to do from the beginning. And they're going to come out and say there was all this fraud in Arizona and that Donald Trump indeed won. Now he's out there saying that he's going to be back in the White House in August. What are his followers who, led an insurrection on the Capitol on January 6th going to do when that doesn't happen? What are his followers going to do to myself, to other election workers who they believe committed treason in the election? And if this audit result indicates that that is indeed what happened, this is really scary. And it is not how we do elections in America. And so our job really is to continue to uphold the integrity of our elections and to help ensure that voters, that there's transparency into the system, that voters know all the things we do to secure and make sure that elections are fair and accurate. But yeah, and I think, after the election, after the inauguration, when they kept looking for ways to get a foothold into somehow continuing this process with this audit, they were looking for any place. And so the Senate issued a subpoena, the judge in the court upheld the subpoena, and we have no statutory framework for what's happening right now. It just is being allowed to continue. And they're writing the playbook here to take this kind of thing on the road to other states. And so we have to be writing the playbook as well as how to stop it from continuing.
So that is the question that all of us have here. Why was Arizona, why was this legislature so ripe to take the lead, to write the playbook on this? What conditions were prevalent here, or what individuals were leading the charge? We do know, for example, that there is one representative who is under investigation for his involvement in January 6th. And certainly is someone who was leading the charge here. But what made Arizona so ripe to lead in this incredulous kind of action?
Well, yeah, I think you have a lot of legislators who were extremely vocal following the election. Mark Finchem, who has achieved national notoriety as a leader, not just in Stop the Steal Arizona, but around the country. In the Senate, you have Senator Wendy Rogers, Senator Sonny Borrelli, Senator Kelly Townsend, all very vocal in questioning the outcome of the election. And so, Senate President Karen Fann trying to appease that part of her party and a very vocal base. But I also think there's an indicator in there was a public records request that released a whole bunch of emails in the Senate, from the Senate, about the audit, and there was one that was highlighted in the media of Karen Fann recalling a conversation with the former president, and it was almost like she was giddy about it and knew that she had to follow the marching orders that he was giving. And I also, but that being said, I mean, certainly she is not free of fault in this whole situation. She's dug a hole and it's so deep now she can't get out of it. She's very tied to what's going on now. And it wasn't just about appeasing a part of her caucus and a part of her party, but what we're seeing now in the legislature, and I know that everyone on this panel can attest to that, we're seeing the most extreme power grabs that we've seen ever. And I was elected in 2010. Democrats were a super minority in the legislature. And I don't think things were as bad then as they are now. And they were pretty bad in 2011 and 2012. The Republicans have the narrowest margin, the narrowest majority that they've had in decades in both chambers. And the level of extremity and the power grabs that they are trying to do, and unfortunately being somewhat successful, are just unprecedented. And that is also what we're seeing here. They're seeing a state that is shifting. They are out of touch with everyday Arizonans, and this is what they're doing to try to hold on to their power.
Jody, I'd like to turn to you as someone who is a policy analyst, as someone who has the overview, understands the strategy on all sides of the aisle here. Why do you think that this state has been so ripe for the extremist legislation that has been put forth, and particularly, of course, for the kind of power grab that is occurring in terms of undermining the credibility of our election. I would like to note, by the way, that the last time Secretary Hobbs spoke to NCJW was in October of 2019, and you were telling us all the measures that were underway to secure the elections. So Jody, can you give us a context and somewhat of an overview and perspective, please?
Oh, sure. I think I've been working in or around the Capitol at least 20 years. So I observed that this all started long ago, actually. I mean, I think this has definitely been, an exclamation point and inflection point with the election and then subsequent loss of Donald Trump. But I can tell you for at least a decade or more, we've seen norms and institutions, but especially where the legislature is concerned, norms just crumble and disappear. And I think the last 4 or 5 years have taught all of us, like when we don't all uphold norms and institutions, they're incredibly fragile. And I'm sickened that, a very extreme group of people has figured that out. Pass a budget behind closed doors? Sure, why not? I mean, Secretary Hobbs can attest, she was around when we still had like budget hearings that members of the public came and testified at, subject matter experts, right? All that is gone. And I see increasingly budgeting and big ticket legislation being done just completely out of view and entirely in the majority. Without consulting or including the minority. But that has been, that practice has evolved over at least a decade, as I said. And the members we have on now can comment to what some of the present day reality is like, because I'm sure it's worse than even I know on the ground there. But this has been a long time coming. Arizona's always been a conservative state. But I think, we were just incredibly fertile ground, unfortunately. And then this new injection of extremism has just accelerated everything.
Rep. Salomon, I'd like to ask you, because you also served as co-minority whip last session. So when did you notice, I know we've all heard both Secretary Hobbs and Jody talk about the evolution, but when did you begin to see it crystallize?
The first year I was elected into office. I've been on the election equivalent committee every single year that I've been in the legislature. And so at the time we had 25 Democrats and 35 Republicans. Now they have a one vote majority. But seeing the veracity in which the Republicans wanted and sought to punish the voters for increasing the minimum wage that year and guaranteeing workers paid family leave, and their unapologetic and shameless nature of attacking the state constitution, both the Voter Protection Act and attacking our constitutional right of citizens to propose their own laws. When you're in that committee hearing and you see this assault on at least the state level foundations of our democracy, in reaction to them being displeased that the voters went around them because of their blatant inaction for decades, and the same is true with education funding and the Invest in Ed Act last year. But that was, as a state legislator, it was shocking. It was jarring. Those committee hearings would be packed with citizens, packed with people who wanted to protect their constitutional right to propose initiatives. And then the Chamber of Commerce would come in, or our utility companies, or, you know, these powerful, Sylvia, what you were talking about, these powerful, well-resourced, heavily funded special interests that fund the Republican Party would come in and say, no, we need to take away the voice of the voters. We need to diminish direct democracy, because otherwise the people will go around the seats that we bought in the legislature. You know, you go look at Mark Fincham's finance reports, look at Walt Blackman, the abortion is murder bill sponsored financial reports. You will see even David Stringer, former Representative David Stringer, after he said those white supremacist comments about immigrant children, watering down the white children in schools, and all of us were shocked by it. After he made those comments, go to his financial reports and you will see these same interests that are now not only attacking our democracy through state legislatures, including the Heritage Foundation, which is funded by the Koch brothers, but these are the same institutions now that are working double, triple, quadruple time at the federal level and trying to pass the federal interventions that can literally protect the states from these extreme state legislators who have pledged their loyalty not to the United States of America, not to our democracy or the Constitution of Arizona, but they pledge their loyalty to Donald Trump. And they pledge their loyalty to the insurrectionists who try to overturn the will specifically of the 3.4 million Arizona voters who voted in the 2020 election. So I think people are even more aware of it, because it's just, it really is like, but I feel like I've been the frog that's sitting in the boiling pot, but the frog that's kind of noticed, like, no, things are already hot. And now it's like, you know, we're at that brink where we really have to make a decision, like, what is next to protect our freedom to vote? And that goes from the ability to vote for your own election officials, but also, you know, again, in 2017, we made it even harder for citizens to propose initiatives. And now that Invest in Ed was successful, we continue to see the legislature with the governor's flat tax and the frivolous lawsuit that's most of the claims were just tossed out in court. There's one more claim that Karen Fann, it seems to be a consistent theme here. President Karen Fann, who follows the will of the extremists of our party instead of, again, what's best in the best interest of Arizonans, is advancing to the Supreme Court. But it is a very corrupt, in my opinion, this is a very corrupt and abusive cycle, and this is not a functioning democracy, and everyone should be alarmed by it. I just want to make one more note. Secretary Hobbs, you have done an amazing job defending the voters and defending our democracy, and you've done it in an environment that I think, with the threats that you and your staff have received, I don't think anyone can anticipate, and, you know, continue to be a strong fighter for us out there. You've done a phenomenal job, and we're grateful for the work that you did to protect Arizona voters this last cycle.
I would like to ask Rep. Teran, take us inside the legislature. Let us indeed pull away the curtain. You were talking earlier, I think before we started, you know, I said, while the legislature is technically on recess right now, I said, are you busy in meetings? Is everybody working behind the scenes? And you had a comment that I found so shocking, which is, people don't talk to one another. There are little cliques. Can you take us inside? How does all this happen? Is it a lack of communication? Is it exclusionary politics? Is it so cliquish and so motivated, again, the theme, by special interest agendas, that there is no way to focus on the needs of the population?
Wow, thank you, Sarah. No, that's a really, really good question. How can we take you to what's happening at the state legislature? You know, it's exposed with the way that the chairs of the committees run the committees, where there is no public input, where legislators are shut down, where bills are just crammed through and with very minimal process. So that what we see is what we get. Unfortunately, these legislators have an unwillingness to work in a bipartisan manner. We, we have a great leadership team on the Democratic caucus in the House and then the Senate, and they do their best to reach out across the aisle to say we are willing to sit down and negotiate, particularly because they are not in the super majority. We are 2 seats away from majority in the House, 2 seats away from majority in the Senate, and yet they are not the people who sit down and negotiate for Arizona's values. And like you were saying at the beginning, we are still in a pandemic where people have suffered economically, people have suffered emotionally, physically, and this was the time for us to show that Arizona could be a state that could thrive, that we have resources to put back into the community. And yet, what we see from our state legislature is a way of finding ways of giving breaks for the rich. So yes, we have to go back to the fact that we have lobbyists, we have corporations that are the ones who are many times moving the agenda. Everybody knows that in order for a bill to get moved in the House and in the Senate, all the way to the governor, you need at least 31 votes in the House. You need 60 votes in the Senate, and you need 1 signature from the governor. So that's 48 signatures at a minimum, right? But what happens is that there are sometimes shadow lobbyists, or there's some shadow special interest people like Kathy Herod that could be the additional signature, because they are so ingrained with these Republicans, and it's unfortunate. We are starting to see a movement, though. I want to give people hope that what you just talked about at the beginning, that the stakeholder group that came together on reproductive rights and freedom was instrumental to make sure that we exposed what was happening at the state legislature. And I think that one of the things that's happening is that in Arizona, we have seen a movement of progressive politics grow, and we are growing also at the state legislature. So everybody who's watching, even though it looks dark at this time, we are working hard for us to get to the majority, and so that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and so that the ones who are actually moving the agenda are good people who want to move good policy, like this group, like Lucha, Planned Parenthood, and so many others. And so right now, the specific comment that I referenced before we started was that we are unfortunately not having those conversations behind the scenes. And even the Republicans within their own caucus, they exclude people who are not necessarily moving their extreme agenda. So there are a lot of people in the shadows. There are people from leadership within the Republican caucus that caucus with the executive branch, and those are the ones who are moving the agenda at this moment.
And while I hate to add more negativity when we're trying to find some positivity here, the fact is that all these changes can only come about through voting. And right now, we are facing a situation where we have attacks on the counting of the votes. Are those more dangerous than the voter suppression bills that have been passed here? For those who may not be aware, there was a bill passed and signed into law that would remove people from the PEVL, a permanent early voter list, if they did not exercise that mail-in ballot 2 elections in a row. 80% of Arizonans vote that way. So that's very detrimental. But all the other attacks, let me ask you this, Secretary Hobbs, do you agree that attacks on the counting of votes are even more dangerous than the attacks for suppression of the voting? And what is the plan to make the public understand that their future is at risk? I mean, how do we get people to wake up?
Well, I think it's important to understand that this really is all a coordinated effort, and it's hard to separate the attacks on parts of the process from the legislative attacks on our rights to participate in that process. And one of the things that my office tried to do, and we invested a significant amount of resources in our public education campaign this year. I think probably more than any previous secretary's office has done. And we worked in conjunction with the counties so that we had coordinated messaging. Most of the counties are not Maricopa, and they don't have large PR and communication staffs to help them get the information out. So the fact that we were able to put together a comprehensive campaign that the counties could use for their own areas was really, really helpful, and helped contribute to the success of the elections in terms of historic participation. I'm really confident that we met our goal of no voter having to choose between their health and safety and their freedom to vote. And the public education campaign was a big piece of that. That is also the tool that we use to educate the public about how we are keeping our elections secure, shining the light of transparency onto the process so people understand what's happening. And that was also important in pushing back against the and counter the lies that are out there. Arizona.vote is a good resource. We have a rumor control page that worked to address and attack many of the conspiracy theories that came out right after the election. But this is a coordinated attack, and we have to fight on all fronts. We have to ensure that we're providing transparency into the process, ensure that we're keeping election workers safe. I think that's an area that we saw unprecedented civic engagement, people wanting to get involved and help ensure that elections could happen, and that voters were safe and poll workers were safe. And I'm worried about that continuing into the future because people saw the attacks that happened and continue to happen. And we have to, when these bills are being passed into law all across the country, we have to make sure that we are connecting the dots there, that these are being justified by the big lie about the election, and it's all part of the same effort to continue to undermine election integrity and make it harder for people to participate in the process.
But again, this is all part of this special interest agenda. There have, we passed, the state passed Prop 208 to fund education. Education's not being funded. Now there are efforts afoot to prevent ballot resolutions from ever seeing the light of day. I mean, everything, not just the voting and the mail-in voting and the voter IDs and the fact that they passed a law that no longer lets us cure our ballots for days after by signing a signature that may have been forgotten. There's other agenda going on here. Just whoever would like to respond here, let's just get a conversation going instead of question and answer. But how do we bail out from this? How do we salvage? We're all residents here in Arizona, and yet every day we are seeing all of our rights and all of our privileges and our well-being under attack. What do we do about this? Is there any way prior to next year's election? I mean, do you have any power left, Secretary Hobbs, any actions to take? Or let me ask our two reps. I mean, the Senate president, it's now coming out that she was in communication, I won't use the word conspiring, but in communication with Donald Trump about this fraud. Is there any action that can be taken? We have Representative Fincham, who wants to run for Secretary of State, but he was at the forefront in demanding this audit. And of course, there are photos of him and evidence of his participation in January 6th. What can the legislature, what can the officials in power do right now?
We always, I'll leave it to Secretary Hobbs, but I think like I always go back to what we've learned in organizing is like there are three things that we always have to remember is like we have to build political power, we have to register people to vote, we have to remind them of what's happening at the state legislature, give them that reason, and we need to have conversation one by one. And I think that organizing early is going to be critical for us to change the powers at the state legislature, to change the powers in the executive branch. We need to register people to vote. We need to organize and always remember that we have the courts. And I'll speak with my the Arizona Democratic Party hat on. One of the things that we did as the Arizona Democratic Party was sue the Senate president, sue the Senate, because they wanted to conduct this audit in the dark. They didn't want to put procedures in place. They didn't want to let the media in. So we had to take them to the courts, and we can never forget that we have to exhaust that option. And I just want to add something that you said, like the agenda is clear. We're fighting an agenda of people who have not shied away of the purpose of moving these voter restriction bills. Let's remind everyone that even at the Supreme Court, the Republican National Committee lawyer, attorney, talked about having to move these type of restriction bills or these measures because it puts the Republicans in a competitive disadvantage, that politics is a zero-sum game. We heard it in our elections committee. The chair of the elections committee literally said that the quality of vote matters more than the quantity of votes, and that not everybody should be voting. So we have to have us as legislators, we have to have, we and the members of the public, we have a responsibility to remind people that that's the real agenda. And when there's an agenda to obstruct people from voting, that means that we are obstructing any policy that's going to improve Arizonans' lives. So that's something.
Jody, let me ask you, as someone who has an overview, who was involved in strategic planning and legislative policy, what were the most surprising moves by this legislature? Some of the most astonishing things that have come up so far, and feel free, legislators, to jump in as well.
Help me out here. I think the initial reluctance to even take health and safety measures in the face of COVID, I was shocked by that, frankly. I probably shouldn't have been, given the way that COVID, even masks, got politicized, but I was shocked to see legislative leadership put staff at risk, which they did, by not enforcing a mask mandate kind of on campus. The other things that have surprised me, I mean, it's always been kind of wild and woolly here, but I will say the lack of decorum has gotten, way over here at an extreme. You may remember, on the subject of voting rights bills, two members of the legislature got into what can only be described as a cat fight right in the middle of the floor. Right. on broadcast, which is, it's funny in the moment, but I'm going to go back to norms and institutions, right? It degrades and erodes the institution when people behave like clowns. I mean, I would say, like, maybe we don't want everybody to vote. Not everybody should be a legislator, present company accepted. That's just what I would say. But yeah, erosion of norms, decorum, and the important norms, where it's like, it's not a rule anywhere, but you at least let Democrats talk during committee, or don't try and vote for them, right?
I'm gonna jump in. No, it's actually rules. Like it's in our rule book, and then it's, you know, anywhere that our rule book is silent, that's where Mason's manual procedure governs the body. And so there are very explicit and clear rules that define decorum and define our right to debate. But Jody, I mean, you touched on something really important, especially on these voter suppression bills, where Representative Theron was talking about how literally the Republican majority that are justifying these bills are using the same arguments that Jim Crow segregationists were using to try and prevent Black people from voting when they were fighting during the civil rights movement for their franchise. And it is some of the ugliest moments where they silence and violate our First Amendment right, freedom of speech, to log these concerns and the rights of the public to come in and testify, were on these voting rights bills, where communities of color, Latinx communities, Indigenous communities, Black communities, other communities that were going to be negatively impacted by these pieces of legislation more uniquely and more severely than your general population. The veracity and the ugly way that they silenced and shut down those voices, because also to Representative Theron's point, when we are able to log on the legislative record the disparate impact that these bills have on federally, key emphasis on federally protected voting populations, that builds a record in which we can take to that other protected branch, which is the courts. And they have become so nasty, they have become so power hungry, that even though we have the right to do that, protected by the United States Constitution and protected by the rules that govern our body, they believe, much like our former president, that they are above the law. They believe that they can make up the rules as they go, however they see fit, however suits their purpose. And I would say, for me, I mean, the legislation was ugly this session and continues to be ugly because we're not out of the clear yet. But I have never been treated so poorly, and just being on top of that, being a woman of color, and on our committee, most of the Republicans were men, all the Democrats were women. It was unbelievable, and you have nowhere to go. They have the permission of the speaker to treat us like this. And the full leadership team. And so that's where, you know, this education and conversations like this are just so crucial, because people need to know what's happening.
Rep. Solomon, you need to add one more thing. What happened in committee with your vote explanation and the chair wanting?
Yeah, he committed a felony. It's so ironic. Like, I don't get it. It's just like, do you see what you just did? On a bill that purports to prevent voter fraud, the chairman of the House Government and Elections Committee tried to cast my vote for me, which is actually prohibited under Title 16 of the Arizona Revised Statutes. And if we had a functioning democracy, would have been charged with a felony. So it's also just like, I don't know, you just can't make this stuff up. So
You can't.
No.
You can't.
I mean, our title, State of Madness, fully explains what was going on, and it was indeed maddening. So here's a question one of the viewers has here. I have friends who say they don't have time, they're at their wits' end. For those people who have a finite amount of time, what is the most productive, pointed thing they can do? Where should their energies be directed? Anybody?
No, well, I mean, we always say, make the phone calls, send the emails, even if you think your legislator is with you. It's important that they do hear from you. They can't turn a blind eye when people are calling their office. But if you have social media, break the silence in social media. People might be looking at you like, what? Sometimes I'll post something And, I'm an elected official. People are used to hearing kind of quote unquote the Democratic side of the issue. But when somebody who's not involved necessarily at the state legislature every single day posts something and exposes the extremity that's happening at the legislature, that goes a long way. It's a neighbor by neighbor, friend by friend, the conversation and the way that we are going to organize. So let's not be silent and make sure that we are amplifying. I mean, that's one way. I'll let others add to that. But social media, don't be afraid to post what's happening to expose.
Yeah, I want to build on that. I think there's something, well, first of all, for people who are pressed for time, something that I hope survives the pandemic is remote testimony at the legislature. I think that is amazing that people are able to Zoom in now from anywhere in the state, which you used to have to get in a car and drive here. Like if you were on the Arizona Strip, forget it, right? So that's amazing and a time saver. And I encourage people to take advantage of that because it's an eye opener. The other thing I think we all have to do, I mean, we all in our family and our neighborhood lives, let a lot go in the name of peacekeeping and staying friendly. But let's not let facts go, right? I mean, I think everyone agrees now that we're suffering the consequences that climate change is real. I don't hear that being disputed a lot nowadays. And I think, honestly, it's going to take a whole bunch of us insisting on facts. No, the election was not stolen. No, this audit lacks any legitimacy. And I'm not talking about starting arguments, but just not being quiet when people run their mouths, because that's how you have 50% of the country thinking that Donald Trump won this election, and he didn't, because people are not correcting those misapprehensions.
So why aren't the citizens of Arizona whose taxpayer funds are going toward the Cyber Ninja group, when we are putting money into education, into jobs, into the kinds of things that we need, why aren't they out there protesting? Why aren't they in front of the stadium there? Why is there not just an outpouring of reaction? And also, why aren't we demanding that the Justice Department intervene?
I would say I have seen some protesters. It is quite hot now, so I'm not going to tell anyone you should go protest in front of Veterans Memorial Coliseum and die of heat stroke. So, but I certainly have seen an outpouring of commentary on social media, in my email, from people who support this audit, telling me to keep my mouth shut and what am I trying to hide, but also people who haven't seen the work that we've done to try to fight this off, the Democratic Party's lawsuit, our intervention in that lawsuit, and everything else we've been trying to do, asking how is this allowed to continue? And we have intervened at every place that we can. The entity with the real standing here is Maricopa County, because it is their ballots and their equipment and their election that's being audited. And so, at the beginning of this whole thing, they should have appealed the judge's ruling that upheld the subpoena, and they didn't do that. And that's why we are here now. And so my office is represented by the Attorney General, which you may have noticed is trying to take all the authority away from my office right now. So we don't really have a great working relationship. And when we asked the Attorney General's office to give us legal advice in this matter, he declined and declared a conflict and wouldn't help us. And so we had to find outside counsel. And then the Democratic Party decided to sue. And so we intervened in that case. And I'm proud of what we were able to accomplish there with requiring the limited amount of transparency that there is. Right. But that's the way we've been able to document all of the problems and all of the ways that this is not even close to a real audit that is able to come up with a valid result. We were able to highlight and flag this for the Department of Justice. I know that they're watching what's going on. Their capacity is limited to federal laws, and there are federal laws about ballot retention. And what they've been very clear about with our office is that if we can provide evidence of actual ballot destruction, then they can intervene. And if we can find if there's actual evidence of voter intimidation, they can intervene. And that was taken off the table in the settlement of this lawsuit when they took out going door to door and talking to voters out of the scope of work. And I think the strong words that we saw from the Attorney General, that the U.S. Attorney General, not our Attorney General, Merrick Garland, that was Friday, right? When he spoke up, and I think that was very encouraging, and that maybe they're on the precipice of deciding to get more involved. And then I don't know if you saw our state attorney general's response to that, but he's clearly not on the side of Arizona voters. So
Exactly. And he's throwing his hat in the ring for higher office. So
has to go.
let me, this time is going.
Yeah, can I just add, Secretary Hobbs, I just find it, again, I don't know if it's ironic or just hypocritical. So he couldn't get involved in the fraud when his client asked him to.
Yeah.
But when the United States Attorney General weighs in, he suddenly doesn't have a conflict of interest. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's I mean, and he's like the one standing there saying he's the person standing up for the integrity of our elections, and he's full of garbage. I mean, because he's not. And if that was true, he shouldn't have even given any credence to the Sharpie Gate conspiracy theory back in November. And he should be up there saying, no, our election was secure, there was integrity, and he refuses to do that. And that, to be honest with you, that's part of the problem, is that Brnovich, Doug Ducey, all these elected officials who know better, they refuse to say anything. They're being silent. And look at what happened to Liz Cheney when she did the right thing. She was stripped of all her power, and she's a pariah in the Republican. Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, is a pariah in the Republican Party because she did the right thing. And so they're afraid of the political consequences. Doug Ducey wants to be president. Mark Brnovich wants to be senator. They are not going to upset their base by speaking the truth. I'm a little mad about this.
I think we all are.
We're gonna need that agitation. We're gonna need that agitation because, okay, I know that we're so close to them, but in 2004, when Arizona passed Proposition 200 to require proof of citizenship to register to vote, we were at a different place. That's a voter suppression bill. It's been 17 years of organizing, and even more because there have been organizing before that. But the infrastructure that has been built in the last 17 years is really strong. So we just have to remember that we cannot lose hope, and we cannot forget that we have a stronger party and that we have progressive organizations that have grown so much in the state of Arizona that that we're going to see this on the ballot next year, and we're going to make sure that nobody forgets, and that we have an amazing turnout, and that we get great people elected to the top of the ticket. And so don't be completely discouraged. Continue to organize. That's all I want to say.
This is such a fabulous discussion. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Let me just bring up one very concrete question that somebody asked. Does request to speak make a difference? Do legislators pay attention to that?
Yeah. I mean, the special session bill, the first thing I did after looking up the language was who signed. I wanted to see who signed it.
Okay.
So I do think it makes a huge difference. And in addition to the traditional forms of engagement, and then engaging your electeds on social media.
I know
Right,
the
so
governor's
We
office
put it on, and we oh, sorry, go ahead, Jody.
Sorry, I know the governor's office pays attention when bills come up. They want to see who's lined up on either side, so they see you. Yeah.
And as Democrats, we go back and see how many people have entered in support or against. And we do our best, especially in the controversial bills, to say the number. It's 1,000 people. It's X number of people who are against this bill. We have 3 people, the Goldwater Institute, Kathy Herod, and Free Enterprise Club who want this bills passed. The people who are trying to move the agenda at the state legislature. And that happens. So we leave it on record on the floor or in committee. So please continue to use the request to speak.
That's essential. Thank you. Let me close by having each of you give one brief thought. I mean, we all know that elections, hopefully the next cycle will change things, but we still have a legislative session in process here, and we have another one in January of 22 prior to elections. A lot of damage can be done. So a quick closing thought of how do we stave off the damage? How do we stave off, if not fix the brokenness? How do we mitigate what is happening? Rep. Salm?
So even though we have a very, very slim minority in the state legislature of people who want to protect our democracy and protect the freedom to vote, I think it's really important in this moment in time, especially since we live in Arizona, to recognize that we worked really, really hard against insurmountable odds to get a very, very slim majority in the United States Congress, and specifically in the United States Senate. I have to commend both Secretary Hobbs and Representative Theron, the 3 of us, in addition to numerous Democratic lawmakers from Arizona who are on the front lines, who are on the battlegrounds of fighting to protect our democracy, have been very vocal on the For the People Act, and Congress doing everything and anything up to and including reforming or eliminating the filibuster to get it through. There is a solution, but it's not going to come from our state legislature. It's not going to come from our attorney general, and it's not going to come from our governor. It's going to come from senators like Senator Kelly and Senator Sinema getting on board and doing everything that's necessary to get that federal protection through. If we can actually get that landmark piece of legislation, the For the People Act, and then subsequently after they pass that, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that will just be transformational to our democracy. There are so many things that will stop what the Republicans are doing on partisan party lines, not only in Arizona, but in battleground states all across the country. But it will go further and enact a new wave of protections that we currently do not have as voters. So if you have not yet contacted Senator Sinema and Senator Kelly, please do so. I know NCJW has been nationally very engaged, very involved on the For the People Act in fighting for it. We have a small business letter that I'm going to share in the chat. We need small business owners to sign on urging the passage of the For the People Act, but we have now until the August recess. If this bill doesn't pass before the August recess, it's going to be, its impact will be much more minimal on the 2022 election. So there's still hope, there's still time. And I think being in Arizona, we are some of the most important constituents that our US senators need to hear from.
Thank you. Agreed. NCJW has been very active in promoting the For the People Act, and we encourage everybody to reach out, to email, to call, to be involved in letting our elected officials know that this is what we need.
And come to our launch of a Freedom Ride that we're doing this Friday. I'll put the details of that in the chat too.
Put the location on that in the chat. Rep. Theron.
I think that that was beautifully said. Of course, like always, Representative Solomon. And what I would add to that is like, please, let's continue to work in coalition. No one organization. I mean, I know that we just talked about certain lobbyists and certain corporations and individuals who are with the right, who do move a lot of an agenda. But what we do on our side as progressive, when we are successful, is when we're working in coalition. So please continue to work with the stakeholders that came together in the Reproductive Rights and Justice organization, but also let's make sure that they remember that reproductive rights are impacted by these bad voter suppression bills, and making sure that we're making the connection and connecting the dots of how if one group is attacked, the other group is impacted as well. And let's not forget that we only need one person to say no to these bad bills. And so we need to make sure that we are vigilant with the people who are likely to not support these bills, and continue the pressure on those Republicans, or the one or two Republicans that are quote unquote considered moderate. We don't have that many, but the ones that are, let's make sure that we are continuing to be in relationship with them, because we only need one Republican to kill a bad bill.
Okay, Jody, and I'll let Secretary Hobbs close out just as we had you open. Jody, your thoughts?
Sure. Well, casting around for a hopeful note, I would just reassure people. It's very easy when you are at the legislature all week long, or you are in an agency, or you're an individual affected by what they are doing. You just think like, why do I even live here? Like, what is this? What Arizona is? No, it's not. I'm a native. I mean, we told you that it has gotten worse, but the legislature also in no way, I mean, literally in no way reflects Arizonans. Mm-hmm. Blame gerrymandering, blame crazy district lines. So you have folks who are paying attention to their base. So, extreme voters in one political party in a district are controlling the agenda, which is hopeful news in a sense for the statewide races, right? Because we know, I mean, the Center for the Future of Arizona, all sorts of organizations have put out really good research on Arizona values. And we know just at the ballot box, right? We passed minimum wage, we passed paid sick leave, as was noted, and education funding. I mean, time after time, the totality of Arizonans vote for things that most of us agree on. And I think if we need to focus on all our races, but I think it's good for people to understand that these top of the ticket races are winnable. I mean, look at Madam Secretary, right? We could have a government like this. It's possible.
And Madam Secretary.
You. Thanks so much for having all of us here. This was a great conversation. And I just want to add to what everybody said. I think the bottom line of all of this is that we cannot afford complacency. And I think that a lot of people realized that after the 2016 election, when it was unfortunately too late. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here when I say that, but we are awake now. A lot of people that were not paying attention are now, and we have to keep that up. I know it's hard, it's exhausting, but after the 2020 election, the thing that made me cringe the most was people saying, oh, Arizona went blue. And the fact is, we are not blue. Look at our legislature, we are not blue. We still have a lot of work to do. And so for folks who might sit on their, say, oh, we got rid of the man in the White House and we're okay now. We can breathe. Yes, we can breathe, but we still have a lot of work to do, because the fact is that our legislature, our state government affects our lives much, much more than who's in the White House. And so we cannot afford complacency.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everybody who joined us. I would like to underscore that with the current Supreme Court, it is very likely that so many issues, including a person's right to bodily autonomy and right to make their own medical decisions is going to fall back to the states. That, along with so many other things that people have taken for granted over the years. Therefore, the state legislatures are going to have more power, more authority to affect our day-to-day lives than ever before. So we encourage everybody to become active observers and active participants engaging in requests to speak. I'm going to extend the invitation. If you are members of NCJW, join us. If you're not members, volunteer and join us. We do get out weekly reports on requests to speak, what bills are coming up, and we are very actively involved in the various coalitions and hope that you will participate. So thank you again. Let's all remain vigilant. Let's all remain active and involved and prevent the overthrow of our democracy. Thank you and good night.